I made up my mind very young that I did not want kids. So I remember in my school bus, I was thinking that day that probably the world was not going to be that great of a place to be living in 2050. And so I made calculations if I had kids and what's going to happen to them. And I said, oh, no, I don't want kids. Probably now in retrospect, I think that I was looking at something out the window, poverty, street kids, suffering probably. And I decided I didn't want suffering, especially my children suffering in this world. And so it became part of who I was then and who I am now.
That was today's guest, Juan Camilo. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this journey. My name is Nandita Bajaj, and I'm the host of Beyond Pronatalism, Finding Fulfillment with or Without Kids, an interview series in which, through intimate conversations with women and men from diverse backgrounds, I explore how they are courageously and creatively navigating pronatalism, the often unspoken pressures to have children, whether from family, friends, or the culture at large. In each episode, I dive into personal stories with people who are forging unconventional pathways to fulfillment, including redefining what family means to them, whether that means being child-free or childless, having biological kids, adopting or fostering children or animals, or creating close-knit communities of friends and loved ones. Hello, Juan Camilo, and welcome to Beyond Pronatalism podcast.
Hi, Nandita. Thank you very much for inviting me, and hello to everybody.
And I'm really thrilled to have you here, and I'm excited to hear about your very unique story. So Juan Camilo, will begin your story really by getting to know a little bit about yourself. So if you can introduce yourself, tell me a little bit about where in Colombia you live, what you do.
So my name is Juan Camilo Jaramillo. I am 61 years old and I am a marine scientist. But now what I do is I teach several different universities. I teach about the environmental crisis, climate change, basically. And I live in Colombia, South America. I live outside of the city of Medellin, which is the second largest city in Colombia. I do not live in the city itself, but outside of the city, like about an hour away up in the mountains. Very green, lush rainforest here in Colombia.
And I'd love to hear generally what the culture was like when you were growing up around this notion that we all have to create family in a certain way and have biological children. What were the cultural views for you within Colombia, within your specific area where you were growing up?
Okay, so I live in a very conservative part of our country, probably the most conservative part, which is the state of Antioquia, where Medellin is the capital. And I was born in a very Catholic country. I think more than 95% of Colombians are Catholic. So I was born Catholic and I was baptized. But fortunately, my parents were quite liberal, both of them. Both professional. My father was an electrical engineer and my mother was an architectural drawing specialist. So they were educated and I was born into a very conservative society, but with very liberal parents. Okay. So they actually were very understanding of whatever we needed. And I say we because we're three children, okay? So I have two sisters. I am the eldest. But nevertheless, the society itself was is still expecting everybody to have children. When I was growing up, all everybody talked about was having a family, eventually marrying and having children. But I did not have too much pressure about that. So I made up my mind very young that I did not want kids. The reason I think I did that is because I am hypersensitive to the environmental crisis. And even then, back in the 1960s, I was born in 63. So by the time I was 10 years old in 1973, I already knew that something was not quite okay with population growth and with the environment, pollution, and many other things. So I made up my mind very young. I think before I was 15, I knew I did not want to have kids. And that kind of caused a lot of discussions within my extended family, not with my parents. They probably thought he's going to grow up and then eventually he's going to want to have kids or whatever. And that was very logical for them to think. My dad had a company and he told me several times that I was going to take over his company and then my kids will actually do the same. But, I didn't want to go and get an engineer degree and I became a marine biologist. So in a completely different path. So I think both my parents very soon understood that I was not going to have kids. And they respected that. And that's why I guess they didn't do much pressuring. But my extended family did. My grandmother, my uncles and aunts. Oh, my God. Evil eye. When I said that I didn't want to have kids, mainly, and I still remember this particular uncle that told me that I was selfish because I didn't want to have kids. How come? I mean, what's going to happen with humanity? Are we going to go extinct if everybody thinks like you, et cetera, et cetera? And I couldn't understand. I was still very young, very rebellious. So I was basically talking back to the adults saying that I wasn't selfish.
That's a really young age to have that kind of realization, and that's quite admirable that you were already thinking that. What were the things happening around you that made you question it?
Yes. So I remember in my school bus, and I was thinking about the year 2050. And I remember thinking that day that probably the world was not going to be that great of a place to be living in 2050. And so I made calculations. If I had kids, how old were they going to be and what's going to happen to them? And I said, oh, no. I don't want kids. Probably now in retrospect, I think that I was looking at something out the window, poverty, street kids, who knows, suffering probably. And I decided I didn't want suffering, especially my children suffering in this world. And so it became part of who I was then and who I am now.
That's quite incredible to have that kind of reflection at such a young age, because so many children really are still very much self-absorbed. Were there any other people around you who were modeling that or examples of people who didn't have children?
I think now that you mention it, yeah, one particular uncle, my grandmother, my mother's mother, she had 11 kids, okay? So it was a big family. My mother's younger brother, Alvaro, he didn't have kids. And he was maybe 10 years older than I was. And he was the only one that did not have kids from the whole big family. He was a puppeteer and he was a very rebellious, also 1970s young man. So I think maybe he was an influence for me now that I think about it. But there were others, of course. I have many cousins that, just like me, they do not have any children. So I guess it was probably the beginning of a trend that it is now very, very evident here in Colombia. Just recently, there was this survey. Kids from 18 to 25, they were asked one question. There were 100,000 data points. So it's a lot of kids, all school kids. And there was only one question asked. How many kids do you want? 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. And the answer that won, if you will, was 0. I think maybe I was just a little bit ahead of that, but that's what kids are, at least here in Colombia, are thinking.
That's an incredible stat. In Colombia, especially given you say, it is a relatively conservative country. So I'm very heartened that it's become normalized enough for younger people to be able to confidently own that choice.
Yes. So as a teacher, because I teach at the university level, although my students are a little older than 20 or 25 because they're getting master's degrees, I do hold a lot of conversations with young university students. I use that in my classes to illustrate that they actually do have a choice, that they can actually choose not to have kids. But still, It's a Catholic country, and even though they can choose, the pressures from society are probably still there. Colombia is a relatively conservative country, but right now, for example, we are going through a political phase where for the first time in history, I think we have a progressive president. So, of course, we are polarized like every other country in the world. But besides from the religious pressures, we compare quite well with other countries around us, Venezuela, Ecuador, even Mexico, which is also a very Catholic country. And now, watching what's going on in the States, some candidates are actually insulting people who do not have children. That's not happening here, not that I am aware of. So if we wanted to compare Latin American country like Colombia with the U.S., for example, I think we're doing actually quite well.
Sure. Let's fast forward a little bit to your life when it was time for you to figure out what was family going to look like for you. What happened? How did you stick with this decision?
Well, so I have been married 3 times. So the first time I was married when I was very young. I was probably 22, 23. I was in the States. I married an American girl, and we were married for about 8 years, I think. And she also was of the opinion that we didn't really need to have kids right away. Let's wait. So we did, fortunately, okay, because otherwise I would be paying alimony right now. I'm sorry. So we got divorced, and I came back to live in Colombia, and I remarried. And then that's when I found, my second wife, she wanted to have kids badly. But I told her I don't want to have kids. And she said, she maybe thought that she could change me. By then, I was 30-some. It was part of my personality. I was not going to have kids. I wanted to get married to her. But so that didn't last too long, about 4 years. So that marriage also dissolved. Part of the reason, I think, it was my negative response to the pressure that she was putting on me. We need to have kids, it's time, I'm getting old, you're getting old, although we were only on our 30s. But she was a very Catholic person, and so she pressure. I don't think that was the only reason why we got divorced, but it probably contributed a lot. And then I married again, for the 3rd time. This happened about 24 years ago. And then my new wife, she did not want to have kids for many reasons. One of the reasons that she still doesn't want to have kids is that she has a brother that has a genetic condition, and she might be carrying that genetic problem. And so she knew when she was a very young kid, also in her teens, that she didn't want to have kids. So that's more or less what my family life has been. And then finally, I guess I found somebody that did not want to have kids either.
I'm really glad that you found somebody who shared that view with you, because as you found, there are so many couples who break up because of that one reason, or one partner manages to convince the other partner to have children despite their desires, and then they end up regretting it.
Yes, and it's a decision that you cannot take lightly. Just because somebody's going to convince you is somebody's life. You have to think about it very, very carefully. And I think I did. And I am so glad that I did. Life is never easy. But I think without kids, in my particular case, it's much easier than it would have been if I caved. So not having kids, it's been one of the best decisions I ever made. It has allowed me to first continue with my studies continuously. I am now also an artist. And I think in economic terms, it has been a lot easier. There is a saying here. It's very Catholic, and it's basically to justify people having lots of kids. And they say that kids come with their own bread under the arms, that kids basically bring their own money or on their own food. But that's just a saying. But many people think that when you have kids, then somehow money shows up and then you can take care of them. But the statistics do not agree with that. There is a lot of poverty and a lot of suffering, a lot of hunger. In economic terms, I had less pressure to be successful, if you will, and that allowed me to do many more things than I would have if I did have kids. Now, many people tell me, oh, well, you hate kids, and that cannot be further from the truth. I am an educator. I like kids. I am patient with kids. I like to teach kids to do stuff. So it's not that I don't like kids. It's just that I don't like my own kids. It's just a very simple equation, I guess.
Totally. I mean, that's such a common misconception with a lot of people who don't have children. People just assume that you don't like kids. I mean, there's so many things in life we don't do. We don't go and become singers, but we still like music.
Exactly. Good analogy. I will be using that in my classes. Thank you.
But, the point about not having to feel the pressure to be quote unquote successful in the traditional sense of the word, so much of our life revolves around making enough money to be able to support our families. But very few people talk about the personal expense of having children, which is losing a lot of your own creativity and your own ability to contribute in meaningful ways.
I mean, it's just basically being able to develop your own desires without having to put all of the resources that you bring in into the future of your kids. Okay, so now if every parent thought about that, then we will live in a different world. But people are people. It doesn't matter if they have 10 kids, they still don't think about their future. So I guess my main reason for not having kids was probably my own anxiety about bringing somebody to this world that will eventually somehow end up suffering because of environmental problems or whatever. And it is becoming truth that this world is harder and harder for the new generation. So kids that are going to be living in the next 40, 50 years are going to have a hard time. And I am glad that I did not bring anybody to suffer. I will suffer myself. That's not a problem. I am here already, but I don't want anybody else to suffer because of my selfish decisions to have kids.
Yes. And like you said, for the children and the people who are already here, there are so many ways to better their lives through the work that we can do. And as an educator, you are doing that. What kind of conversations are you having personally, but also with your students?
So since I teach about the environmental eco-social crisis, I talk about population a lot, about the carrying capacity of the planet. And so I show them the calculations. How is it that this world is going to support that many people? Who's going to be living with what? So I talk about this day after day after day, not only with my students, but with my family and with my colleagues and friends. And they already know that I am very passionate about curbing the population growth. That is such an unusual curve for a mammal of our size. I am a biologist. I have to think about that in biological terms or ecological terms. And so I tell them all the time that if it wasn't because we domesticated plants and were able to feed ourselves, if we remained hunter-gatherers, then our population probably would have never been more than 10, maybe 15 million people in this earth. But for reasons that are difficult to understand, we became a different species. And so now we are 8-some billion people. And that is, it cannot be sustainable. The planet was not prepared for a species like ours. And so this is a constant conversation with my students. Many of my students, although they are young, already have kids. And I feel sorry and bad about telling them this, but I feel that I have the responsibility to let them know that there is a physical carrying capacity for this planet and that we need to be thinking about that. Otherwise, it's going to convert into a lot of suffering. It already is a lot of suffering. So,
Yeah. Well, I'm sure they are grateful to have a teacher like you because it's amazing how much effect people have by just simply modeling those behaviors.
It is true. I give them these examples where I show that my grandmother, who lived to be 100, she had 11 kids. 9 of them survived to adulthood and had their own kids. So now there are like 72 descendants of my grandmother. And so what I do is I give them the numbers of her own CO2 emissions, and hers was very, very tiny. But everybody combined, she's responsible, she and her husband, my grandfather, are responsible for thousands and thousands of other CO2 emissions that are our emissions. And I said, making the decision to not have children, or at least have less children, it is very impactful. I mean, you can actually measure that in lots of tons and tons of CO2 that you will not produce if you had less children. Because one of the questions I asked them is, what do you think is the most damage that you can do to the environment in terms of emissions? Not having a car, not eating meat. And then I slip in not having children, and they rarely say not having children. And then I show them graphs that not having children is the most you can do to protect the environment, basically.
Right. I've done similar presentations for young people, and I show them the same study, with the top personal actions you can take. And I think people deserve to be informed. People would like to make conscious choices. So, yeah, I think that's really cool that you do that.
Absolutely. It's my responsibility as a teacher and as a human being in these times. We are in a very, very dangerous crisis, and we need to do something about it. And this, to me, is the most you can do in order to actually help with the crisis.
Yes, exactly. And, also what you brought up is the impact that has on a potential child when we know the statistics that the next generation is going to have things much, much worse off than our generation or previous generations. So I think the rights of the child, the well-being of the child has to be taken into account at the same time, and not enough people think that far. Is there anything else, any final message you'd like to share about your life story?
As a man, I have been privileged. I have many, many, many cases of colleagues. Well, my sisters, for example, they don't have kids either. They were not pressured. So I guess it was a question of luck because of our parents, that they were quite liberal. But many people, especially girls here in this country, do not have that choice. They just get pregnant when they are 15. So I have been very, very lucky being able to make choices. But I think about people who are not that lucky, and I hope that I will live just a few more years so I can continue teaching about the importance of considering not procreating as an alternative to a healthy, happy life.
Definitely. And also, you brought up access to reproductive autonomy. If more and more people had that, just like you and I did, they'd be able to make more responsible choices. But unless there's choice, we can't even expect there to be responsibility, because people already are victims of a pronatalist system where they are compelled into that situation. So they both go hand in hand. And thank you for teaching your students such important work.
Oh, thank you for letting me tell the story.
Oh, it was my absolute pleasure talking to you, Juan Camilo. It was so good to have you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Nandita.
That's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. What did you think of this episode? Do you have your own story you'd like to share? Check out the show notes to see how you can get in touch with me. Whether you'd like to share feedback about the show or a particular episode, or whether you'd like to join me on the show to share your own story, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much again for joining me today as we collectively discover and celebrate the many different pathways to fulfillment beyond pronatalism. Beyond Pronatalism is brought to you by Population Balance, the only nonprofit organization advancing ecological and reproductive justice by confronting pronatalism. This podcast is produced and hosted by me, Nandita Bajaj, with the support of my production team, Josh Wild, Elizabeth Strunk, Alan Ware, and Kirsten Stade.